All right, so this lesson, we will talk about apostrophes. Apostrophes are used in two ways. One is to either indicate that a word is a contraction or to show possession. A more commonly confused apostrophe is the one pertaining to its with an apostrophe s versus its without the apostrophe. Do you know the difference? If you've guessed that the its with an apostrophe s is a contraction of it is, you would be exactly right. The one without an apostrophe is the possessive form of it. Of course, there are other contractions. Some of these may be more obvious than others, but let's quickly run through them. Can't is a contraction of the word cannot. Isn't, is not. Wouldn't, would not. Should, shouldn't, should not. There are others, but we'll just cover these real quickly. So next, we will look at the possessive apostrophe. The placement of the apostrophe varies when showing possession as follows. You should place the apostrophe before the letter S when one person is doing the possessing. For instance, if you have a guy whose name is Tony and Tony owns an acoustic guitar, you want to give Tony ownership of it, you're going to say apostrophe S, you're going to add an apostrophe S. Tony's acoustic guitar. Now, what would you do when you have a noun or a word that is plural and that word or noun ends with the letter S? In that instance, you put the apostrophe after the letter S. Here's an example. These are the girls' faces. That means there are many girls in a room and each of them, of course, has her own face if it's not a horror movie. So yes, these are the girls' faces. It's saying there are many girls and each of them has her own face. Therefore, you put the apostrophe after S. Now let's look at another example which involves an inanimate object. Our computers, monitors. That means we have many computers in a room and each of those computers has its own monitor. So again, if you have a plural word or plural noun, you put that comma after the S. Okay, so what if you have a person whose name ends with letter S? What do you do then if you want to give them possession of something? It's a good question, very common question, and a frequently missed one. So to clarify and make sure that you never miss these in the future, this is what we're going to do. If the person's name ends with an S, you always add an apostrophe and an extra S after that person's name. An example, Silas owns a lunchbox. So we're going to give Silas ownership of it by saying Silas says. So we put an apostrophe and an extra S at the end of that. Next example, you have a family, last name is Barnes. These are the Barnes' beloved friends. So last name ends with Barnes. So you give them possession by adding an extra S with an apostrophe. And that's it. Let's quickly recap. One person owning something and their name does not end with an S, you're going to add apostrophe S. Plural noun that ends with an S, you're going to put the apostrophe after the S. Girls' faces, computers, monitors. In the last scenario, if a person's name ends with an S and you want to give them ownership, you have to put an apostrophe and an extra S at the end of that. Next, we'll talk about the same apostrophe with possession, but this time we want to look at two scenarios. What if two people are owning the same item? So let's have a look. When more than one person or noun is doing the possessing of the same item or thing, if two people are doing the same action or owning something, sharing something, in other words, only the last person, the second person, gets the apostrophe. Here's an example. Paul and Timothy's perilous journey through Greece. This sentence right here is saying that the journey is belonging to both Paul and Timothy. They are journeying together. Since they're sharing this journey, only Timothy, the second person, gets the apostrophe S. Now, here's another example. Jeremiah and Megan's podcast. Who owns this podcast? is both Jeremiah and Megan. They own it together. So only the second person gets the apostrophe S. So what if two people are doing an action and each of them is doing the action separately? In other words, you each have your own thing going. So in that case, then you each get an apostrophe. It kind of makes sense. I have my own thing, you have your own thing. We should get our own. Each of us really should have our own apostrophe. An example, Ava's and Zion's birthday parties. And these are my little nephews and nieces. Ava is my niece and Zion is my little nephew. But anywho, Ava's and Zion's birthday parties. Since Ava has her own birthday party in January and Zion has his own birthday party in October, they each have two separate birthday parties. They each have to have their own apostrophe. Another example, more nieces and nephews, Gabrielle's and Christian's forerunners. Gabrielle has her own forerunner and Christian has his own forerunner. So since they each have a forerunner, they each have to have their own apostrophe S. All right, and that is all I wanted to show you on apostrophes. So now that we have a good understanding of them, let's go ahead and try some actual SAT questions and ACT question. Again, highly recommend that you try these questions on your own before continuing to see the answer. So question number 1. We are trying to answer question 3 right here. So we're focusing on this part. If it is improperly introduced into the environment, acid wave runoff can pollute waterways, depleting the oxygen content of streams and rivers as it decomposes. So the choices in here, one of them says no change. Another one shows apostrophe giving waterways ownership of something. The part C says could have polluted, so it changes the tense. And D says has polluted waterways, so it changes the tense and introduces an apostrophe. So the question becomes, do we need to give waterways ownership of anything here? Or do we need to change the tense? Let's read it again. If it is improperly introduced into the environment, acid wave runoff can pollute waterways, depleting the oxygen content of streams. So waterways do not own anything here. So anything that has an apostrophe S, we can delete because we don't need to give ownership to anything. Then we're left with A and C. And the question then becomes, do we need to change the tense? If it is present, continuous. So we don't need to change to could have. So that would not make sense. It makes A the answer to this question. All right, so another example. We're trying to answer question 31. So we're focusing on this part right here. Benjamin Banneker, African-American inventor and astronomer, grew up on his family's farm in Colonia, Maryland. So families here is the plural version. They're saying families with an apostrophe after the S. So they're trying to say there are many families, but Benjamin Banneker only has one family, grew up on his family, just one family. Therefore, this would not be correct. Since it's a single family, we need an apostrophe after the Y. So it would have to be B. While we are here on this question, I also want to point out something that we talked about earlier that it's probably important for you to just see. Notice how we have Benjamin Banneker, so someone's name, and he goes on to say African-American inventor and astronomer. And you see that part is describing who Benjamin Banneker is, right? You notice that part, the African-American inventor and astronomer, is enclosed by an opening and a closing comma. This is what we called an appositive, right? It's the part of a sentence that is describing a what? A noun. Do we need it? Do we have to have it? Let's see. If we deleted it, would we have a sound sentence still? Benjamin Banneker grew up on his family's farm in Colonia, Maryland. It would be perfectly fine to delete that. So I just want to highlight here that this is the proper use of two commas to enclose an appositive. All right. So that brings us to the end of the lesson on apostrophes.